You are listening to WHOA Podcast, coming to you from Gainesville, Florida. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the WHOA GNV Podcast, the podcast bringing you businesses and individuals that make you go, whoa. Today on the show, we have two leadership legends, Matthew Sowcik and Nathan Whitaker. Guys, welcome to our show.
Man,
Thank you.
Yeah. What an introduction.
Yeah, I can't bring that energy. I'm going to try, but...
It was funny because as we were preparing for the show, Matthew sent his list of, what do they call that? Like for the green room and that kind of thing. Writer. They call it a writer.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm just joking. It was like, are we going to have mimosas? I was like, of course we're going to have mimosas. It'll be the first show with mimosas. So we got them right here.
So you
and
delivered.
my lovely assistant.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. My lovely assistant. You got drinking a coffee
Cheers.
first?
Coffee first, yeah.
Yeah, she made sure that I got the low acid because remember last time I was telling you about my little ulcer or whatever, so she got the low acid orange juice.
I didn't know that was a thing.
I didn't know that was a thing either until this morning. So, But guys, I'm super excited to have you here. Thank you so much. I really tried to piece this particular podcast together because I knew that they didn't know each other, but I just thought from a leadership standpoint, that's going to be the theme of today's episode is leadership. I just knew that we'd be able to really get into some great discussion on a plethora of different leadership topics. And I'm so excited to get into it. So for the few people that don't know who you guys are, I want to get into the origin stories, like take it way back, but just give us like the 30-second, this is who I am, this is what I do. Right? Matt, go first.
Yeah, no, I am Matt Sowcik. I am a faculty member, a professor at University of Florida. Teach leadership classes to undergraduates, PhD students. Do a lot of consulting, go out, work with businesses, work with mostly emerging leaders, try to help them kind of develop over time. And I'll tell you more about the origin story.
And how did, I'm trying to think back to how we met.
Yeah.
You had a student that was doing something with me, right?
That's right. So one of the exercises that we have students do on that undergraduate level is we ask them to pick a leader and find the qualities, the theories, the things that we talk about in class in that particular leader, and one of them chose you.
Okay. And then that led to you reaching out to me.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So I reached out
That
to
was like,
you
this
and
guy
engaged
is
with
a
you,
genius leader.
That's right. I said
I am 100% reaching out to this guy.
That's right. I had to be.
No, well, I'm so glad that you did because
thanks.
as soon as we met, when you walked in the door, gave you a tour of the place and just instantly became friends and just been a great, that's awesome. So I love it. So Nathan, how about you, man? Give us the 30-second version of who you are.
So I've spent time in the NFL, and as a result of that, have seen some leaders. So I've been able to do some writing and some speaking since then. I primarily write books and am able, boy, it's early, to get on the road and speak on leadership and teamwork and the like. So that's been an interesting, and we'll get into the origins, but an interesting segue for me to do all this speaking and writing lately.
Yeah, it's awesome. This is gonna be so much fun. So Ty, tell us what's going on in your world, man. Is there anything happening in the best of Gainesville world?
Yeah, I mean, we got a bunch of things kind of in the background, trying to learn from these guys a little bit this morning on how to, play a small part in being a community leader here in Gainesville. And I'm hoping today will help me kind of, get the little roadmap a little cleaner for our next couple months because I'm working on a ton of things simultaneously. So hopefully
anything you can give us like a little secret on the behind the scenes?
More just a couple websites where we're trying to take the Instagram side and really become that front door for Gainesville in kind of a shareable, viral way that's a little bit more, natural for students and emerging students and people maybe coming over to Gainesville to start a business or move. So trying to provide some tourism.
Trying to facilitate it all, man.
Trying to facilitate it all.
I'm so proud of you, dude.
So we'll see.
Bad love.
For sure. And I'm watching
my boy right here.
And I'm watching this hurricane. I'm watching this hurricane.
So, well, so We still got that going on. Well,
Yeah,
and we talked about it in the last episode. For everybody who was like watching, who listened to the last episode, we've recorded back-to-back Tuesday and Wednesday to try to get ahead. We're pre-planning for Thanksgiving weeks and that kind of thing coming ahead in November. So, but yeah, hopefully that's not going to be too bad, that Hurricane Michael.
Yeah, it's a Category 4 now.
Keeping my
It's
keeping my fingers crossed. So, all the love to everybody in the Panhandle. But guys, thanks again so much for being here. So one of the things that we absolutely love to do to bring context to who you guys are and what got you to this point is just your origin story. So who wants to kick us off?
You can go first.
Okay. So I grew up in Gainesville, and I was born.
This is Nathan for everybody who's listening. Sorry,
Yes, Nathan. Sixth generation Floridian. Grew up in Gainesville. Went to high school here in town, and then went off to college and law school. Went to Duke, then went to Harvard Law. So as my wife says, I'm educated far beyond my intelligence. And got out of law school, clerked for a federal judge here who actually lives here in Gainesville, a huge Gator fan. Spent 2 years with him, 2 years practicing law, and then was able to break into the NFL. So I spent 3 years with the Jacksonville Jaguars under Tom Coughlin, 3 years with the Tampa Bay Bucks, 1 under Tony Dungy, 2 under John Gruden. And then after I was given my walking papers by the Bucks, decided to find something else to do. They had turned over the whole front office, and so decided to write books. So Tony Dungy and I worked on his memoir together, and that did relatively well. Sold a ton of copies, and so it ended up being a whole career. I just thought that Tony's book would be valuable to people, and maybe I could just write that one book. But it turned out to be a career. So I've done 9 or 10 books with Tony. I've done Tim Tebow's first book with Tim. And then and a couple of those have been teamwork books and leadership books, so it's been fun to then branch off into that area and be able to speak as something of a, not an expert the way the good doctor is, but anyway, I have some knowledge and some insight on people who have led and have kind of a front row seat for some of those things.
Well, but you weren't like a writer as a child or anything. You just flipped the switch and was like, I'm going to write books.
Just kind of flipped the switch, yeah. I was an English major in college,
okay.
And so I spoke at Duke not too long ago and had a professor come up and say, well, so really we launched you on kind of what? And I said, you offered one creative writing class and I was rejected based on my writing sample. So no, you sent me back 17 years. So anyway, I'd always enjoyed writing, but had never done anything formally. So no, and Tony had to sell me to publishers. He and I had been friends and had talked about this book project. So when he finally decided to do it after they won the Super Bowl and his son had passed away and he thought, okay, maybe there is something I have to share. And publisher said, great, we just need a real writer. And Tony said, I trust Nathan. Either it's with Nathan or there's no book. And so that's what got me started.
Dang, so he really went into bat for you.
He really did. And it's
awesome.
Typical Tony that, he figures, and I'm sure we'll get into this more later, but for him it's about the people. And it's about having the right folks around him on the project, on the team, whatever it is. Denny Green told him with the Vikings, it's not about having the best 53 players on the roster, it's about having the right 53. So I guess for some reason Tony thought I was the right one to help him with it. So
that's awesome.
That's where we are.
And so now that's led you, you're still writing?
I'm still writing.
And
yes.
Now you said you're doing a lot more speaking.
I am. I just got back from Iowa.
Is that something that you really enjoy?
I do.
I do.
Just got back from Iowa. I'm going to Minnesota in a couple weeks, speaking at corporate events, and so no, I like it a lot. Spoke to a college basketball team 2 weeks ago, and
do you get nervous?
I do, and I think it's good. I think it gives me energy.
Yeah.
So I get a little bit of butterflies, and
is it like right before? See, because I like to do speaking stuff too, and I get like the butterflies like right before.
Yeah.
And then when I'm on stage, like I'm just like I'm on. I love it. Mm-hmm. I like thrive on it. It reminds me of my I think I talked about this before, my college days of being on stage playing trumpet like in a band and stuff. Yeah. Like just I don't know, just the adrenaline rush for me.
That's probably more what it is, but it definitely is something. But at the same time, I'm able to stay somewhat aware. Like I spoke in Boston a few years ago, and afterwards, my wife said, "Oh, it was great." And I said, "How do you know? You walked out halfway through it." And she said, "Oh, I went to the bathroom." I said, "I could totally see you going." And I'm like, "What did I say to offend my wife of all people?" So
that it plays with you.
Yeah,
that's good.
She's like, "How do you have the time to?" I said, "Oh, I see what's going on, especially if it's you walking out." So anyway,
that's perfect.
That's awesome. Well, Matt, dude, give us your origin story, man.
Yeah, I love that. Someone once had told me, if you stop getting those butterflies, if you stop getting excited, that's the time to get out. Like time to stop speaking and stuff like that. Because I think those are what make you great, and you're able to speak and see your wife leaving and wonder what you did wrong and what's going to happen when you get home. Yeah. So I have quickly learned that when you introduce yourself down here in Florida, you tell, I'm 6 Floridian, and that's awesome. Everybody introduces that. I am not. I actually grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, so most people know Scranton from The Office. Yeah, that's right. So that's our claim to fame up there. They would bus in The Office people and send them around the parades at, all the major events, 4th of July, and they'd wave, and we would get excited, and it was great. It's a great, great, great place. A lot like Gainesville, just a really good community, good people trying to do the best. It was awesome. So I grew up there, went to school at Wilkes University. It was a small little school, a place that I absolutely loved, helped me, mentored me, guided me, fell in love with this idea of human behavior, helping people, and I really wanted to do it in a place where I could take people who wanted more out of life, more purpose, more passion, and found leadership. So started doing some research in leadership, knew that teaching was what I wanted to do. I felt most comfortable in that setting. So I went to Columbia University in New York City. It was awesome living in New York City in your 20s. I loved Columbia. It was a great place to learn, to grow, to be in the business school, to learn a little bit about leadership, to do a number of different things. And then September 11th happened, and I decided through that experience that I really wanted to be closer to family. I wanted to get back to the community that I grew up in. So I moved back to Wilkes-Barre, and it was the right choice. Started teaching at Wilkes with this idea that I would go back and get my PhD, and eventually I did. I went to Gonzaga University, a small little basketball school. March Madness does well every year. So we went out there, and I got a PhD in leadership studies. There's only a few places back then who gave a PhD in leadership studies, and I felt like if I could learn everything I could possibly learn about this topic, that would add some value to the world. And I got my PhD, went back to Wilkes, started doing some consulting because I felt hollow in this idea that if I just taught theory, if I just taught what was in a book, that I would never really truly understand how it worked in real life. So started working with some amazing companies, Mohegan Sun Casino and Lazy Boy, and just really great places that taught me a whole lot about leadership and a whole lot about how what we know from a theory perspective or a research perspective doesn't work at all actually when push comes to shove. But my true origin story, I guess, is, I'm a father, like you, I'm a husband. I often introduce myself, like that's a big part of who I am, and I think it's important. I have a wonderful daughter who's kind of always in angst about Facebook. She's 21 and her boyfriend and all those different things. And I have 2 boys. I have Chase and Carter. Carter's 9 and Chase is 7. And I always tell a story, kind of understand who I am. When we had 2 boys, 2 things became my responsibility. It was the birds and bees talk, and we'll definitely do that when they're 40. And then the other thing is potty training. My wife said, you know how to use the equipment, you go ahead, use the equipment to show him how to do it. And I lined Carter up when he was 3, and Carter is absolutely the reason we had Chase. He's awesome, he's kind, he's sweet, and Chase is the reason we stopped having children. He has every gray hair on my head. So Carter lines up, in like every good father, I Google, how do you teach a kid to potty train, because my wife doesn't believe at all that I'm going to be able to do this, and says take some Cheerios and toss them into a bowl. So I did. I went in there, I tossed them in the bowl, and I said aim, and he delivered. I walk out, I'm pounding my chest, I'm feeling like bang, I got this. Chase turns 3, and I go, this is easy. I got this now. So I go in and I throw the Cheerios in, and Chase lines up, and then he reaches in and he eats them. And I think, how does that even happen? Like, how do 2 people who come from the same parents, the same training, and I quickly realized, and it really helped me with this leadership stuff, that like human behavior, when we talk about relationships and how we help people lead, like it's different. It's different for everybody, and we have to figure out a way to really connect with people so that they can learn how to lead, they develop, and then ultimately it works for them and their purpose and their passion. So it's a little bit about my origin story.
I bet you were so proud.
Oh, gosh.
A proud leader dad.
Just absolutely, yeah, like, gosh, I can't even get this right. Oh, man, that's right.
Well, I mean, what do you guys want to talk about when it comes to leadership? Because I feel like there's so much. I mean, let's just start with what's the best lesson that you've ever learned in leadership?
One of the things, let me just touch on something quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to Matthew, because one of the things that I talked about in my book with Tony Dungy on leadership, and this was not where I thought the leadership book was headed. And I had crafted it and put a lot of thoughts together and had watched Tony and watched other coaches and had all these ideas on leadership and priorities and values and keeping things in line. And then Tony, when he looked through it all, he said, that's great, but you're not talking enough about building other leaders. And so the book became The Mentor Leader. And it was, how are we building other leaders around us? And Tony felt strongly when he was with the Colts that when he retired someday, he didn't want to leave a vacuum of leadership, and so he was intentionally trying to create other leaders. And so when he stepped aside, Jim Caldwell took over, and they went to a Super Bowl. And so to Tony, that was a success as far as building other leaders. And it seems like that ties in, and I'm going to put him on the spot because I'm not sure how he'd say it, but something about humility and leadership and all that feels like it's going to be tied into that organically, as far as when we're leading for our own sake, when we're trying to do it. It doesn't have the same. It doesn't resonate. I don't think it doesn't. It turns into manipulation if it's about us. But when we lead for the sake of others and building other leaders, I think it actually is better for all of us around, whether it's the community, the organization, whatever it is. And I have a feeling the good doctor is going to have some thoughts on humility and how that ties in. But I hope so, because I'm fascinated.
Well, can I give you a real quick story on humility?
I would love it.
Nathan and I went out to lunch, and I don't know if you remember this, but somebody
Cafe C.
Yeah, Cafe C. Somebody came up, and I don't know. I think they had just recognized me, and I was saying hi. And I was like, "Oh, this is my friend Nathan," and Nathan extended his hand and said, "Hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you." And the person said, "I feel like I know you. I've met you somewhere or something like that." And I mean, and the lady was like, "Well, so what do you do?" And he was like, "Oh, I'm a writer," or like, "I'm an author." And they just really left it at that. And I mean, there wasn't like, you didn't like extend a resume. And I don't, for somebody who was just there having lunch with you, that's the first time we met, right? Or no, we had met at like a networking event one time, but I had invited him out to lunch, and I just remember that moment. It just resonated with me. And I was like, man, like, talk about being humble and having,
Well, I figured my T-shirt that said 9 New York Times bestsellers was enough. So,
but I don't know. Just it's a trait that I think when I don't know it's a trait that you have to experience. I think for me, like I experienced that moment, and I was just really inspired by it, I guess is what I say. And I think sometimes you don't even really realize that those little things that you are doing in your behaviors on a daily basis, like, can inspire somebody else who's sitting at the lunch table with you. You know what I mean? So
that's right. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Usually I'm a bad example for people, so thanks for sharing that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. No, I think this idea of humility is tremendously important. We were talking a little bit earlier about it. Whether it's Tony Dungy, we can kind of go through leaders, and what you find is those leaders who have sustained success over a period of time really have that leadership. And man, I'm not the first person to talk about it. Most managers have Good to Great on their bookshelf, and Jim Collins talks a lot about this idea of humility and determination as being really important pieces of that. And even somebody like Steve Jobs, who was probably the biggest narcissist out there, in his first go at Apple, talks about and is quoted as saying stuff like, it was the worst tasted medicine I ever had, was this idea of humility, but it made me most successful in the second run because I learned and I took feedback and I grew and I understood people's talents and I was able to use those finally. So this idea of, I don't think humility is the opposite of overconfidence. I think it probably helps people who are overconfident be overconfident, but also understands from a real accurate perception, how do they lead, how do they engage, and you can be both confident and humble. But often we talk about modesty, and I think that fake modesty, or modesty is kind of that outward, I want you to see me as something, but truly humility is about us. It's about understanding where we're at, and I love that. I love that example that you gave, because that's humility. It's not modesty. It's this idea that in this setting, that person probably doesn't need to know that I have, 9 New York. Like, I don't need to go in and tell this person. I just need to be engaged with this person. I need to ask them questions. And I think that's really good humility. So I think that's why that story is just awesome, because it's that proper perspective. For me, and you were asking about best advice I ever got, I truly believe that at the core of it, leadership really comes down to perspective, and we need to understand our perspectives and how we engage with others. something like, that Undercover Boss show is like, that's such a funny show because people are amazed by it. They're enthralled by it, but it's the CEO who's completely forgot everything about why these people are important. Then they go back and they spend some time with them. They become what they say is humble. They're so shocked that these people really resonate with their organizations, and then they give them tons of stuff because of it, which is probably not humility at all. It's more modesty. It's more of this idea that I want people to see me as a particular way. Those who truly become humble probably all along know that these people are the reason their organization is successful. I mean, it's what I've seen in you. It's the reason I think you're an amazing leader, is because I always see you putting out the relationships you have with those who work with you, how important it is, and I don't think you ever forget, without them, the screw shop doesn't run or this doesn't run, and that's a really kind of humbling perspective. So, yeah, I love the idea of humility, and really it's the research that I've engaged in. I think if we had more humility, we wouldn't see the problems we're seeing now in so many cases, CEOs, politics, communities, those sort of things. I think it's a lesson we could all learn. And it was funny, yesterday, the Wall Street Journal published an article that said, why humility makes the best managers and stuff like that. So it's starting to come around. I think we're starting to see the need for it. I think we need to probably redefine what humility means, because people see it as, thinking less of someone or less of themselves, and that's probably not the true definition of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in that, is that the best quality of Coach Dungy?
I think that really is a fantastic quality of his. And as Amy, my wife, always tells people, what you see is what you get with Tony. And that was really an important part of wanting to write his book, was seeing that every day behind the scenes. The year I was with the Bucks was a really tough year. We started the year 3-4, and it was like the third year in a row Tony was rumored to be fired. And so the Tampa Trib and the St. Pete Times, which back in the day were separate newspapers, and they were all writing articles, and who could be the most scandalous as far as when he'd be fired, and get things really ramped up. And Tony was just, he said, we're not going to change what we do, and we're going to stick with what we do. We're not going to change anything. We're not going to panic. He said, leaving the game plan is a sign of panic, and panic is not in our game plan, from Chuck Noll. So he would always say stuff like that, and I realized that that's just exactly who he is. And so I asked him one time late in the season, he and I were alone in the locker room, and I said, I just want to thank you for your witness in light of what's gone on and the way you've conducted yourself. And he said, Nathan, I really think that there are times when God wants there to be a circus so that people can see there's another way to respond. And it was not like hey, we just roll with the punches, hey, whatever. He said, no, I think I'm supposed to be here and to be going through this so that people can watch me. And that, I think, there was a lot of humility in that. It wasn't ever about Tony. It wasn't about whether he's going to be fired, he said, no, I'm supposed to, whatever I can do to help others in this situation. And so while the rest of us are panicking, and I'm making sure my contract's all in line. I've been there 6 months, and I'm already revising my contract, making sure it's all set, reworking it with the GM in case I get fired. And I even told Tony years later, I showed him, I was in charge of keeping the 3-ring binder of other coaching candidates during the season. So that's how awful it was. I mean, here, Tony and I are really close, and they're working on, the owners are telling us to look at other coaching candidates, so I've got it hidden in my drawer. Oh, man. As we're going through them, we're hoping we're going to win, and I'm like, this is awful.
He's still your friend?
He is. I told him, and he kind of went, wow. But I said, I didn't want to. I didn't mean to. And I put all lousy candidates in there. Actually, that was the GM strategy. Our GM was like, he went to the owners and he said, look, here are the folks out there. And if you were looking at all these and being objective and you put Tony in the mix, Tony would come to the top of this list. So that he went in there and said, don't make a change. And of course,
nice.
They didn't like Rich's theory. But anyway, so that was what we were trying to do with that. But Tony was all about, it's not about me. Ultimately, it's not about me. It's about what I'm supposed to do, where I am, and how can I help others. And so that was a huge part of writing this book and wanting to do that, and how he leads and who he is.
I mean, this is a little off topic, but what's it like having Tony Dungy as your friend? I'm just kind of like, dude, this is like so awesome. That's a great question. Just being able to like pick up the phone and be like, hey, this was like, I got this going on. I mean, I don't know, just having that as a friend. I mean, he's an amazing coach, amazing leader. I mean,
yeah.
What's that like? That's the question.
Well, it's funny. It certainly changes the way I look at sports teams and the like, because I'll text him and I'll go, hey, why in the world would they re-sign a guy like this? Think of like total cancer on a team, right? Somebody who's always acting out or kicking the kicking net over on his team sideline, or whatever. You fill in the blank on whoever that might be. And he'll say to Tony, "What are they thinking?" And he'll come back with, "That's no way to build a team. You got to be kidding me. I wouldn't want that guy, let alone anchor my whole future around him." So anyway, it's just kind of fun to be able to bounce things off him. I tried to explain to my wife when Tony was becoming an analyst, when he retired from coaching and went into broadcast stuff. I tried to explain to my wife something about what was going on in the field on that particular day, and then we turned on the broadcast because it was going to be Tony's first broadcast, and he said, "Okay, now here, let me show you a little bit about safety play," and he took a couple of clips, and Amy went, "Is that what you were trying to tell me? Because it's so clear when Tony does it." So it's nice to have somebody who can explain things clearly and succinctly and has a real good perspective on everything. So it's fun.
I mean, when the first book came around, I mean, it sounded like he wasn't sure about whether or not to write one.
Right. He wanted no part of it. He said, "Nobody wants to read about me, and I'm not sure I have anything to share." And so we didn't know how publishing worked. But he thought, he was going to end up with a garage full of books with his picture on it that we couldn't sell. So anyway, he always wanted no part of it. And then after his son died, Tony and I were talking along the way, and he said, "I feel like I do have more to share now." He said, "So many parents have reached out to me," and he said, "Sadly, I'm not the first parent who's gone through this, and there are a lot of parents who are dealing with this." And he said, "Thankfully, in my position, I'm very visible, and so people have been reaching out to me to help." He said, "Maybe if there's something I can do to help others, maybe I should do a book." And so that's when he really started thinking about it more seriously. And then he got such a response to his comments on the podium after the Super Bowl, where he said, "I'm really proud of being the first African-American coach to win a Super Bowl, but I'm even more proud that we did it the Lord's way." And got such a response to that he thought, maybe there is more that people would be interested in.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I feel like he's leading all the time. And what I mean by that is, like, I follow him on, like, Twitter and that kind of thing, and, like, he's not afraid to speak his mind, his mind, and really kind of, I don't know if you'd say calling out others, but he's I've seen him direct tweet other people, and it's almost like he's holding them accountable to their actions via Twitter. You know what I mean? So it's I don't know. Again, it's inspiring. It's cool to see.
Yeah.
So
he's a neat guy.
That's neat. So what's I guess, staying on this leadership topic, going from best, starting at the best, like what's like the worst trait that you guys have seen in a leader personally?
Well, you want me to start?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Please.
All right. So one of the things that I've seen is, and we talked about this a little bit before we started broadcasting, so this would be good. I'll get a chance to share. You were worried all the good stories would be gone. And thankfully I don't have any good stories. So, no.
I did start recording like 2.5 minutes before, like, doing my intro, and because I was so nervous that you guys were going to keep talking about really good stuff.
Well, one of the things I saw in organizations was that a lot of times there wasn't a mission or a vision that was set forth. And I think that, one, it doesn't help empower anybody or engage or energize people if there's no clear goal or stated mission they're reaching out toward. It also then creates an opportunity for someone leading to make it about them. So I've been in organizations where we were, to use Patrick Lencioni's term, everybody was in a silo. And that was by design of the leader. And they wanted to keep you over here and you over here. And so, and it wasn't very, it didn't function very well when you had folks in the scouting department who are trying to understand who's out there and who's going to come available in free agency, but they can't value them because the people in the salary cap part who are dealing with the money aren't communicating with how the cap works and what the ramifications are. And so you'd get these reports and you'd realize, well, I can't really do anything with this because this person doesn't understand what this other person's doing. And there was very little. And so the only person who then ultimately understands is kind of the one who's in the leadership position who keeps everybody in their boxes. And I think that's hard. And it doesn't help, as Tony was working the other direction with the Colts to try to make sure he built up other leaders. It didn't help anybody then move into the next level. So anyway, I think that was one of the things that was a deficiency when it wasn't, hey, here's what we're doing and here's why we're all doing it, and so let's all rally around that. Instead, it became I'll go to work and I'll do what's on my plate and take care of that. And so everybody was kind of doing their own thing without integrating into a team. We were a team in that we were near each other, but we were not necessarily a team in that we were integrated and working together.
Do you think that's because so many people just don't know what they want in life? I think it's, I mean, I don't want to simplify it, but I feel like when you're a head coach of a football team, the mission is a Super Bowl win. At least, maybe not in the macro, but I feel like in the very micro setting, it's like we need to win the Super Bowl, so we need to pull the team together,
right.
and that's the mission, right? Like that's what we need to do. And now the vision could very much be like, I want to build these individuals into men, right? And like put their life on a track that's going to go beyond the NFL, right? So, but I
think that's hard. And it's time consuming.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's easier to, I think, in some ways, do what you saw, and you've kind of worked your way up, and you've seen certain people do it, and you're like, okay, I get the on the field stuff, and I get this other stuff, and let's just do that, and let me do what's on my plate and take care of this, and go on to the next step. And I think it's hard to stop and say, okay, now how am I going to put this aside and talk to these guys about building into the community, and what are they going to do? And you suspend a guy for not showing up at a school function, as Tony did with the Bucks. Somebody didn't show up for an elementary school appearance that he was going to show up for, and so Tony ended up sitting him down. And that's got to be really hard when you think, wait, the owners just really want me to win today, and they really don't care that the guy didn't show up on Tuesday at the elementary school. But if you're willing to take the time and say, no, this is, again, a bigger picture, a broader perspective of what I'm trying to accomplish here, I think you have a greater chance of getting everybody on board, but it's a lot more time consuming, and it takes a lot more energy from the leader, I think.
Do you feel like, I wonder if it's like fighting the system all the time though? Like the NFL as a whole, like, does the NFL my question is like, and maybe you don't know, maybe this is a question for Tony, but like, does the NFL care if that individual goes to the elementary school?
Yeah, I think it's probably not different than other corporations where the shareholders will say, look, all I care about is this quarter's earnings. I really don't care about, don't bother me with, whatever you guys are doing in the community or retaining employees or whatever it might be. I just want to make sure you hit earnings. And I think Matthew would tell you, no, we're not going to hit earnings this quarter or next or 10 quarters down the road if we're not able to build these other leaders around us and build into a team that works and is functional and is glad to come to work. So I think all these things matter eventually, but I think it's hard to convince folks that the short term needs to keep in mind all the long term stuff as well.
Right.
I think that's true. I think it's a perception issue. I think the perception is we can't have both. We either win or we are good. We either win or we do community service. We either win but they're not mutually exclusive by any means. I really do believe that leaders like Tony have this perception that these things can go together, that we can be successful, we will be successful, and we will help boys grow into men, and we will help our community thrive because that's who's sitting in the stands. Perception, really, it plays such a huge role with this leadership because our perception leads to our thoughts, and our thoughts lead to our actions, and our actions lead to our habits. And it's those habits every single day. I mean, that's what Tony does on Twitter. He's leading this undivided life. It's who he is personally and professionally because that's his habits. That's what his perception leads to his thoughts, thoughts leading to actions, and actions leading to habits. I always tell a story when trying to talk about this. So I did some work at Lazy Boy, and my whole job at Lazy Boy was to go in and kind of diagnose the organization and tell them they wanted to know why they weren't selling. It's the same thing. Like either you win a Super Bowl or you sell that couch that day. Like everybody has these perceived goals, and that's what it's all about. And people would walk into Lazy Boy. I was sitting there and I was watching, and people would walk into Lazy Boy and they'd be hugging their wives and loving their kids, and they would open those double doors up, and and all of a sudden the sales associate would walk at them, and they would think, like, oh God, why is this person pressured? Like, what's going to happen here? And they would do the same thing over and over. They would say, just looking, and they would stick their hand up in front of this person's face, and I would always be like, my God, where do we do that? Like, where does that ever happen that we feel comfortable saying, we go into your store, say, just looking and stick our hand, and then they would run behind and hide behind a couch, and then eventually they would need somebody. And it's really this idea that the perception is, oh my God, I'm going to be pressured, and our thoughts are, how do I get out of that? And our actions are, I feel comfortable in this situation, throwing my hand up in someone's face and making them feel, unwanted, uncared for, unappreciated, and that becomes the habit. It happens all the time. I think the nice thing, though.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
So did you change that perception?
So that's what you talk about is what's the perception? Can you change the perception? It's not, I don't think, our job. I don't think it's the leader's job to change the perception of the people walking in, because that perception changes. So you meet Marge, and Marge shows you...
Did you get people to stop going up to people as soon as they walk in the door?
So this is the deal, is that if they don't talk to that person within 30 seconds, it's seen as, you're not engaging with the customer. I think instead of doing that, what you talk to the sales associates about is, okay, what's going to eventually happen? How do we build this relationship, and how can we engage the relationship? Two things happened out of that. So we talked a lot about why it was impacting this store more than other stores. It ended up coming down to they were much more feeling oriented and much more extroverted, so they needed that stuff. So we talked a little bit about that. But two things came out of this. One is the realization that you meet Marge sends, sells you or shows you the perfect couch. You leave because you're not going to buy that day. But the next time you walk in there, you don't stick your hand up, you look for Marge. You're saying, where's Marge? So through experience, we can shape perception. And that's what leaders have to do. They have to have these experiences. And I loved Tony's story, because that's exactly what happened. Is he doesn't want to sell his book. He, for some reason, believes that he's not this amazing leader before it happens with his son. Then the thing with his son happens. He has his experience, and his perception changes that now I have an opportunity. And I really think that's true about all leaders, is that experience will shape people's perceptions, their thoughts, their actions. What one guy ended up doing there, it was awesome. So we're right outside of Philadelphia in northeastern PA. He would have people walk in, and if a lady walked in with her husband and they did that immediate thing, he would say to them, "Oh my gosh, are you a Cowboys fan?" And the people would become like, "No, why would you say I'm a Eagles fan? Why would you?" And it would immediately start a relationship. And then we'd say, "Oh my gosh, that's my bad. So you're an Eagles fan. Do you like the quarterback?" And they would start engaging around this conversation. So it would never happen where they would say, "We don't need you right now." And it was just a way to change people's perception of why they were doing it. And it's just one example. I really think
that he was there to help, and not necessarily.
Think about this. So this probably doesn't apply to you because you do this every day. But for the person listening right now, imagine you walk through your double doors, you bust them open, and you go talk to your coworker tomorrow. Tomorrow you walk through those doors and you say, "My God, Sally, today is the greatest day ever. I am so blessed to be working in this organization. You are an amazing person." What does she say? She probably says, "Oh my gosh, it's too early to be drinking mimosas," or, "Why is happy hour started at 9?" But then you do it the next day. And maybe she says, "You know what? Ugh, why is this happening?" But if you do it 21 days in a row, 3 weeks in a row, you bust those double doors open, you go in, you say, "It's an amazing day. I'm so blessed, Sally, to be working with you. This is an amazing company." On the 22nd day, you go in, quietly open the door, sit down at your desk, turn on your computer, and don't say anything. What's Sally going to say? She's going to be like, "What's wrong? Oh my God. What's happening? Are you okay today?" We can change people's perception of us, and we can change our own perception. And that's really what leadership is about. It's about having experience or giving people experiences so that they can change perceptions. So if you want to change your culture, you're going to have those experiences that shape this idea that it's not just about winning. And when you start doing that, when you start having those moments where the community really matters and you can engage with that, or, you have a tough life event and the coach shows up at the hospital, whatever it may be, all the things that Tony has done, when you have those experiences, people say it's different, and this is a different culture, and we can win, and we can have, this amazement happen right in front of us. And you know that. I've seen you do that every single day here, so those experiences.
Make me sound like I'm a great guy. Stop it.
Host, I gotta make you sound good,
On those lines, one of the really things, and I think it comes down to some authenticity, and it's got to be kind of who you are, and because I think it'll be hard to do on the 22nd day. If I'm really not wanting to be that person or becoming that person, then I think eventually, I don't know. That's
right.
But there's got to be, and one of the really cool stories I heard, speaking of Cowboys, Wade Phillips, former coach of the Cowboys, and he was scheduled to do a nonprofit on like a Monday evening. He's going to do a charitable event, and so I happen to know the folks who were running that event. And they were telling me later, that it was the day that Wade was fired after, and I forget what, but they lost. So he goes in Monday morning, Jerry Jones fires him, and then they were telling me later, Wade was there. And, it was 2 hours after he'd been fired, so now he's no longer, head coach of the Cowboys. Now he's showing up as the deposed coach of the Cowboys, and he's still at this event. And they were like, "Thank you so much." And he's like, "Why wouldn't I have come? I told you I was going to come. And this is an amazing event that you've gotten. This function is for this really worthwhile thing. Why would I have not come?" And it was never about, "Hey, I'm showing up because I'm coach of the Cowboys." It was, "I'm showing up because this is important and this is what I need to be doing." And so I think a lot of times if the leadership's that authentic, then again, it had to be totally embarrassing, right? You show up in public 2 hours later and everybody's going to want to talk about why'd you get fired? Why are the Cowboys underachieving? Whatever. And he's like, no, this is about these kids and these underprivileged kids, and so of course I'm going to show up.
And isn't that why leadership training doesn't work and leadership development doesn't work? Because people get excited for the 2 weeks, 3 weeks, one speaking engagement they go to. They leave there, they say, oh my gosh, I'm going to be better. This is awesome. I took these notes. I'll run leadership training.
My speaking engagement worked. Totally worked.
That's right. But this everybody but you. That's the idea, is that people authentically haven't changed. So they go back, and for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. So if you do it for 21 days, people will see it different. But then the next 21 days, if you don't, they'll go back. And that's what always happens, is that people fundamentally haven't changed from that experience. So how do we give people experiences? How do we help them understand those experiences so that they can fundamentally change in that process? Because you have to change. I mean, you have to be a different leader if you want to have those things occur.
Right. And I think part of that, too, in the authenticity, one of the things that Tony really was excited about sharing his story, and then when I talked him into doing the leadership book. So every time we'd have a book come out, Tony would say, okay, that's it, I'm done. I don't have anything else to share. So the publisher and I would go back with, hey, this is the Nathan Whitaker Full Employment Act. I need to talk him into the next book.
That's right.
And so we tell him, wow, the world really needs a book on values from you, or the world really needs a book on leadership. But one of the things that really excited Tony about leadership and about being able to share that was that he would see from so many coaches, hey, I need to become Nick Saban, or hey, I need to become whoever it was at the time who was the hot name or the whatever. And Tony's saying, hey, nothing wrong with his style of leadership, but you don't have to change who you are. That there may be ways in which you have to be more intentional or have to be more outward thinking as far as how you're relating to people. But it's really hard to change just intrinsically who you are. And so these folks would end up in leadership positions, and they'd decide, well, I've now got to become the blustery, dictatorial, whatever, when that's not who they were. And that's not who they're really designed to be internally. And so I think part of what Tony wanted to share is, look, if you're loud and gregarious and whatever, great. If you're quiet and introspective like me, great. And you just need to make sure that you're doing some of these things that will help you lead and influence others, but you don't have to change who you are. And I think that's important to keep sight of and easy to lose sight of along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that even goes deeper into this idea that if you're running a great business and you feel passionate about it, other people can't sell your story, so they have to find their own passion in that and their own story and their own authenticity in that. If we just tell people how to feel about our mission or our values, it never works. I mean, it will never work for that emerging leader who has to find it themselves. They have to figure out how they're going to tell their story about the company, about their experience, and those sort of things. And it's really hard to tell people is it just doesn't come from a high, this decree of here's our mission, here's our values, here's our vision. People have to really, truly have that experience where they feel that or engage with that. I think that's so true.
I can just sit here and just watch you guys talk about this all day.
This guy's good. This guy's good.
Ty, what do you got for these guys, man?
Nathan, I wanted to get a few more insights on the differences in leadership strategies from some of the other head coaches you've worked with Coughlin, Gruden, and Dungy, all Super Bowl winners, all very different personalities. Maybe Coughlin and Dungy are a little bit more similar than Gruden. Plus, I'm an Oakland Raiders fan. So.
Okay.
But speak on that a little bit, and then how the ownership groups or the management kind of leads from above. Guys like Dungy with the Glazers, they are businessmen. They own Manchester United and a ton of other things. It's just a part of their kind of portfolio to some owners, while others like Jerry Jones, it's like their heart and soul.
Right.
So if you kind of speak on how, from a leadership strategy, if there's leaders above you, how you kind of interact as a leader with someone that's managing you in your group, and just how that all has interacted in your experiences.
Okay. I'll touch on a little bit, but I really want to hear Matthew on this because I think it's very hard, and it's very hard to do. I think it's important to realize that leadership is not necessarily positional, so there's almost always going to be somebody above me. And so how do I lead when I'm not necessarily the person with the ultimate authority? And that's true of, Tony or Tom Coughlin or whatever, when there's an owner above them, or others, or certainly me as the, director of legal affairs, whatever that means in a football team, and then having people above me and what it means to lead. But so a couple of differences. So Coach Coughlin was always thinking leadership all the time. He had patent books and other things on the wall or on his shelves, and then pictures on the wall, and he was always thinking about leadership. And one of the interesting things that Tom did with respect to creating habits and the like was that when he came into Jacksonville, he instituted a lot of rules that guys were chafing under and thought that they were very college oriented, that he had just come from Boston College and a very successful run there. And so, you can't wear sunglasses outside, and you got both feet on the floor during team meetings and other things like that. And guys were thinking, hey, I've been in the league 8 years. I can handle myself, and I know what to do at a team meeting, and I can pay attention. And then guys didn't really notice it, but by year 3 and 4, Tom was relaxing some of those, and he always felt like it was easier to relax something than it was to, and so he wanted to set the standard, and then if that didn't work over time, or it could be adjusted, versus setting a standard beneath where he thought it should be, and then trying to ratchet it up. So I think he intentionally overshot with, here's how I want to do this, and here's what I want to accomplish. Part of where this all comes together, I think, and it's how you're we talked about who you are and the like, and I think that when you try to get away from how you really are wired, it doesn't really always play well. And one of the ways that came out was in the construction of the roster. The 53rd guy on the roster usually doesn't play a whole lot. It's usually a 5th string cornerback or a 6th linebacker or a 6th receiver, somebody who might play some special teams, probably didn't get on the field a lot. And so Coach Coughlin would always be looking at the waiver wire and seeing if there was somebody else, maybe some diamond in the rough that everybody else had missed on. And so you're in week 8 and somebody's not on an NFL roster, maybe we sign them and get rid of the 53rd guy. Rarely works. I mean, ton of scouts out there, a ton of folks. So rarely is there somebody on the street in week 8 who really is going to make a huge difference. But he thought, let's just try that. If the guy's not playing much, let's just take a look at whoever else might be out there. And then John, at one point, cut a guy, 53rd guy, and said, find me somebody, find me a receiver. So he didn't have the diamond in the rough thought. He just wanted to. And so we said, why'd you do that? And he said, well, I wanted to keep everybody on their toes. And just kind of, I wasn't sure the 53rd guy was completely on board and whatever. I wanted to keep everybody on their toes. So I cut the guy and just find somebody else for me. Whereas with Tony, we rarely turned over that 53rd spot. And we would occasionally, if somebody's injured or whatever, we'd have to find somebody. But by and large, we wouldn't turn over that spot. And Tony would say, look, from day one, I preached family. And I said, if you ever are at practice and I hear that you're neglecting family responsibilities or whatever, later, I'm going to be upset. So come to me with family things, but also we are family. And Tony said, so you don't cut your uncle, right? Or you don't cut your cousin because you're not sure that he's working out. You do everything you can to make that work. And so because that was a part of the intrinsic values, then that then dealt with how he was going to lead the team and how he was going to construct the roster and why. And so anyway, I think that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think that being true to who you are and those values then comes back to, and none of those were wrong, I don't think, in the approach. But because Tony was saying from the beginning, here's how we're going to do this, that then influenced that. But John had a different approach, which I totally get if somebody's not always paying attention or whatever, whereas Tony was thinking, all right, if he's not, let me sit down with him and see if we can get to a better spot before we have to take any extreme actions. So that was a part of it. I feel like there was another part of the question that I could have addressed, but it's escaped me.
Just from like the ownership side. So.
And the ownership side too. So you've got a variety of owners, and I think that also influences things. So early in Tony's career, Malcolm Glazer was the owner, and Mr. Glazer felt like this was, I don't know if an investment's the right word, but he wanted to focus on the overall organization and really kind of left it to the football people to run the football. And then he stepped back about the time I arrived, and his sons had then grown up in the business and had spent now 5 or 6 years. And so they got much more heavily involved. And so we saw a lot of that where certainly by the time Tony left, and then we had Coach Gruden, we had ownership far more involved. And so that created a whole other level of dynamic in trying to and I think a lot of it is educating along the way, is just making sure that people understand what you're doing and why. And that was an interesting thing that Tony did, is that Tony would have the media in. They would eat with us. They would come through the food line with the team, and so we'd be sitting around and they'd be all around and whatever. And I've been with other teams where, Coach Coughlin was very clear on these are the media areas, these are the team areas. And Tony's approach was, whether it's ownership or media or whatever, I may as well educate them on what I'm trying to accomplish. And that's always going to be helpful for me and for our team if they understand what we're trying to do. And so I think that was helpful at times. But what you see sometimes with ownership, and it, I'd be curious to hear how this works in other industries. But Tony was called by another team owner, and after he had retired, he was called by another team owner and asked to help on a head coaching search. And Tony said, "You don't need me." And the owner said, "Well, I think it'd be helpful to have you in here." And Tony said, "Look, you've got a $4 billion business, and it's in all these cities and doing all these things. All you're doing is hiring a leader for the football team." And the guy said, No, football's totally different. These qualities don't translate to football. Football's unique and it's its own animal. And Tony said, "Absolutely not. It's really not. You're hiring a CEO for the football team. And so look for the qualities of the CEO that you would." And the owner said, "No, it's different. You got to come." So it's interesting how some people will not fall back on what they've learned or and they view it as, now I'm in a different situation. Nothing I've learned before applies here, which I think is I think that happens at times when people get promoted or find themselves in a different spot. They think, okay, now this is different. What are the new rules? When a lot of times it's everything you've done before to reach that spot and all that you've learned and developed. Any thoughts on that?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that goes back to that authenticity piece. It's amazing to me how difficult it is for us collectively to understand the important relationships in this. And we miss that, and we keep missing it. And I think what you've talked about with Tony and with the other coaches is this idea or this difference between a culture of health or a culture of dealing with disease sort of thing. So if you think about it this way, we go to a doctor, every 6 months for a checkup, and that's so that they can find things before they become really bad in that process. Now, if you only wait till something gets really bad, until you have, stage 4 cancer or something, like at that point, what you can do with it as a leader or as a doctor, it's very limited. It's very limited. But if you have that check-in, if you let people know that you care about them, you're engaged with them, you set up that culture of health instead of just dealing with things. And that's often what I find with leaders is they don't worry about something until it's way too late to deal with it. So they'll call someone in to do a training, or they'll call someone in to speak, or, a couple of years back I had, it was during Y2K, we had a group call myself and some others up to do emotional intelligence training. It was a big buzzword back then. Can you do emotional intelligence training? And I was just starting out in consulting, so I was like, anything that people called me up, I was like, oh, of course I can do that. That's definitely something I can do. And then I would figure I'd learn it, and then I'd go out and do it. And it was funny because I remember at that moment, like this divine intervention of saying, like, just ask why. Like, why do they need this training? And I asked, and they said, oh my gosh, we have our IT group working in 12-hour shifts 7 days a week to get ready for Y2K, and there's only 4 of them, and one threw a water cooler at another. So if you could come in and do that training, we can get them going and back up. And I was like, gosh, this isn't a magic wand. It doesn't work that way. You're killing these people in this process. So I think what you talk about with Tony is this idea of an awareness that we need check-ins and we need health and we need to worry about the relationships, where a lot of times we only worry about those when it's way too late, or people are fighting, or we get those silos and they've been there for years and years, and that's a ship that's really hard to turn around once it gets to that place. So I really like what you say about this authenticity. Certainly as you grow within a position, knowing who you are, and then being able to really, the task is important, but the relationship's just as important in the process.
And then Matt, I've got a couple questions on
Please.
For students and emerging leaders or people looking to become leaders for the first time or find a mentor. There's tons of people to choose from, and depending on what mediums you use, if it's podcasts or Facebook or Instagram, there's all sorts of fluff out there too, or false leaders promising the world this like work from anywhere type of stuff and different things. How would you instruct someone to kind of push through to find someone to emulate or someone as a mentor to fit your personality? What's that process look like? Because I think we're all kind of doing that, working with each other and building relationships. We're always trying to get better through working with others. I coach golf, and I'm a professional golfer, so I'm always looking at different ways to coach and lead, and I teach different people with personalities that are much different, and I'm coaching them as much as I'm learning, as well. So someone for the first time that's like, hey, you know, I've been lacking in confidence and leadership, how would you tell someone to start?
Yeah. You should get Tony Dungy as your.
Yeah, there you go.
That's it. I mean, that's the answer to this.
The answer.
I think inherently the problem is people who tend to be really narcissistic leaders have this charismatic, they're really likable at first, they're really engaging at first, so we're naturally attracted to those leaders. So you often find they're the ones who most interested in getting a group of mentees. I talk to students, I talk to emerging leaders about, holding off on that initial, this is the person I want to be engaged with, and going out and exploring. Mentoring's an interesting piece. We know mentoring's really important, yet we keep talking about everybody needs a mentor. And I don't know people know how exactly to get a mentor. And it's a lot like a friendship. You don't just go up and say, hey, will you be my mentor today? There has to be a relationship that'll work for both people. If it's just one-sided, like any relationship, I mean, if you think about your wife, if all of a sudden you say, you quit your job and say, I'm just going to sit on the couch and watch CSI episodes, get through Las Vegas and then Miami, and then just keep doing that for the rest of your life. Like, she's going to kick you out. Like, you're not going to be in that relationship, because relationships work because they're two ways. They're repeat relationships and they engage with each other. So I think that's true with mentoring. You have to find someone who builds a relationship and wants to see you develop and wants to see you grow. You can certainly ask people for help. You can certainly learn from people. I think that's different than mentoring. I think every time you go to an amazing speech like Nathan's, you're learning something, you're engaging. I don't think he's immediately your mentor then. I think you can be learning and growing and developing by all of the people who have done this before. But that true mentorship thing is really, really important, and I think it's a relationship. And you find people who connect with your values, that ultimately see the world the way you see it, and not in a short-sighted way where I'm only going to believe people who believe what I believe, but this really connection around where am I going, what's my purpose, and does this person have a similar connection, a similar purpose in this? Simon Sinek talks about this idea of people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And I think you have to find out why people do what they do, and that's where really good mentorship happens. So I encourage students to not just jump at a professor who's pretty charismatic and can talk about this and you really buy into his leadership. Find one that really buys into what you believe and where you're going in the world, and really get to know people. So it's going to take some time to get to know people in that process. And you'll know pretty quickly if that person has time, has engagement, has an interest in building that relationship. But I think it's so important. You're talking a little bit about doing some community work. I think that's one of those things that you can absolutely do for Gainesville is going out and talking about how you've been so successful and your values. And people will immediately be attracted to that. And then finding some space to help those people grow and develop. What I loved about what you said is, leaders have trouble training other leaders or having them grow. I think there's a number of reasons. We are overconfident, we have egos, we have all those things that come with being human. But really, really great people like Tony, you said, will go to bat and say, you know what, I don't need this book unless he's coming with me. And my guess is you never worked harder on anything in your life than that book because of that. And that's when people will give you their blood, their sweat, and their tears, when you go to bat for them and you engage with them. But you can't do that with every single person. So as leaders, we have to be really kind of selective and know what we're looking for, and then really engage with that. Because if we promise the world to everybody, man, we just don't deliver. And we can't deliver. And then we're not being authentic, and then we're losing some piece of who we are in that process. So, yeah. Thanks for asking that question. I appreciate it.
And then the last one I wanted to ask you guys is, who do you guys not look up to, but who are some leaders out there that maybe aren't as well known that might have a podcast or a book or a blog, something that the listeners could pick up or read or listen to, that's maybe a little bit unique or kind of hiding out there?
Mine is Nathan.
Yeah, mine.
Please read Nathan, read his books, go out and see him speak.
I agree completely.
That's right, both of us.
Yes, and that's a wrap.
And you'll be a star leader after that one.
That's exactly right. Just do that.
I'm kind of interested in this topic has come up a couple times in a couple different podcasts, but scaling, right? Like, I think, I look back to when I started the company. It was a lot easier to lead 2 people. It's a little more difficult to lead 20 people. Mm-hmm. It's getting much more difficult to lead 30 people in 2 different teams, because I have 2 different companies now. And it's like, to me, that's super, super challenging. And I mean, something that I'm like 100% am in love with trying to figure out. But I mean, what advice can you give to somebody who, as teams grow, like you get less and less one-to-one time, right? Like if my companies have 300 team members one day, like I'm not going to have the ability to have as much relationship building time. So what do you do in those instances? How do you scale yourself as a manager and a leader?
Yeah, I would argue that that's probably the number one problem for entrepreneurs. They come out, they have an amazing idea that's going to rock the world. They actually get it established. That's maybe the easy part. They get some financing. And when I say easy part, I'm comparing it to this idea of human behavior and dealing with, when you have 2 people and you're in it together and you're up late at night and you're caring and you're buying coffee and you're doing mimosas and there's this engagement and this connection and this caring, that's easier than when there's 40 people, 50 people, 60 people, and that leader's values and vision starts to get watered down and isn't connected, and there's a real difficulty, I think, especially from entrepreneurial leadership, to make that transition to scaling something much bigger. So how do you do it? I mean, I think it's an ego thing. I think it's a stepping back thing. It's a realization that these people need what you gave them, but maybe not from you. And how do you put the right people in place to do what you are doing? Because you have a limited amount of time and you have priorities. And how are you establishing your priorities? Now, I think what Tony does really well, or at least what I heard that Tony does really well, is to prioritize the things that are really important. And building relationships is really important. So when you have to go sign a contract or build a relationship, maybe someone else can go and sign that contract that you trust, and you go out for lunch with that person. But it really comes down to, what are the values, the priorities you have? Often people will get away from those things that made them successful. Being creative is one of those things. I talk about, there's this great little, philosophy teacher says he has a jar and he fills it up with golf balls and says, is it full? I don't know if you've heard this. And then fills it up with sand and says, now is it full? And the class says, yes. Then he fills it up with rocks, or he does rocks first and then sand, says, it's full, is it full, is it full? And they're always saying yes. And the kind of point is that, like, whatever you fill your life up with, that ultimately runs your life. If whatever your purpose is, your priorities are, run your life. We often fill ourselves up with the things that make us feel important. So we want to fix the copier machine, or we want to be on the floor all the time. But really, the things that you should prioritize are those big things that are helping your organization grow. So how are you consistently being creative? How are you building relationships with your folks that they know what is important in the organization? How are you ultimately addressing problems in the future, not just the problem of the copier machine, but all of your equipment and all that stuff. So for me, it's how do you reprioritize what is important to you? Because the priorities that worked for you when you had 2 employees are very different than the priorities when you have 40 employees in that process. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
No, I think that's great. I think it's fantastic. And I think what Tony, and it's hanging on to the things that, again, it's the authenticity, it's the, and it's hard. And so scalability is really more, I got a degree in entrepreneurship because finally I got a master's just a few years ago, because the federal judge that I clerked for always held it against me that my education was incomplete. And since I had no degrees from the University of Florida, and he had 2. And so I finally got a master's here at UF in entrepreneurship. And so I know a little bit of the book learning, but I have not been through the scale, because of course, I've scaled my business to now 1, right? I've scaled all the way from 1 to 1. But I think that's a real part of it, that Tony had these values that were always important as far as family and the like. And so as he grew into different roles, he was able to, in different ways, make sure those were still important and people understood those, such that, and this is kind of a silly example, but when he finally was in charge of the schedule, he set team meetings for 8:30. Staff meetings. Staff meetings didn't start any earlier than 8:30, and he said it's because none of us coaches are going to be around to tuck our kids into bed, but we can take them to school. And so, and the coach didn't have to, if an assistant coach didn't want to, he could come in early, whatever. Tony's not going to dictate what he does, but Tony just wanted to create opportunities and environments where people could continue to do the things that he thought was important, and if they hopefully had the right people on board who also felt like similar things were important. So I think even as you grow into different roles and different parts of the organization, hanging on to those things you think are important and making sure you build those in matters, whether it's 2 people or 40 or 400. But that's a challenge. I do want to circle back to Ty's answer, because while you guys were talking, I was able to buy time to think of a couple of podcasts and others that I've listened to.
Okay.
So 2 thoughts. One, so this is a total dark horse answer, but there was a guy, Colby Donovan, who was a basketball manager here at UF under Billy Donovan, no relation, and then under Mike White for a bit. And he's now off working, and he puts together a list every week of podcasts. And so it's always different, but he'll go, oh, I heard this episode, so go to season 8, episode 14 or whatever, of whatever. And so he puts together a list of leadership, business, whatever principles in different environments. And so he'll put together 10 a week, and so I'll listen to like 2 of those. But it's always a different smorgasbord, and I find that very helpful that he's willing to go out and do these podcasts. The other is, or sort through them for me. The other one is Coaching You. It's called, like you as in university. And it's Brendan Surr was a coach for the Pistons under Chuck Daly, and he was here with Billy, and he's been in a variety of places, been in the NBA and college for 30 years. But he's now put together a podcast. And so he'll have, an assistant with the Celtics speak this week, and then he'll have Brad Stevens, the head coach of the Celtics, speak next week. And then he'll pull out, he had the Ohio State new basketball coach the other day. But just a variety of coaches on a variety of things. And a lot of them are leadership. A lot of it's really not about, it's about team building and leadership. It's really not about basketball. And so I've found those 2 things to be really helpful.
Very cool.
I have one more question. Do you have any more?
I don't think so. A bunch more, but...
Yeah, well, I mean, me too. How important is faith in business or in leadership in particular?
So I was asked to speak at a university. They wanted me to come in and speak on leadership. And I said, that'd be great. And the professor said, no, I found you through, you're writing books with Tony Dungy and Tim Tebow. And so I just wanted to make sure, since I'm, part of a state university, you're not going to talk about God. And I said, well, I'm going to be talking about leadership. And he said, yeah, no, I just want to make sure you're not going to preach. And I'm like, well, right, I understand the setting I'm in. I get it. But at the same time, for me, part of being authentic is understanding that faith for me matters. And that's a part of who I am, and that's a part of how I've, and it's a part of my humility, right? That if, as Matthew said, it's not necessarily about dragging myself down. It's about realizing that I think we're all creating the image of God. And so that means that everybody else out there is as important as I am. And we're just doing different things in different ways. And so I think that matters along the way. And so to totally set it aside would be unauthentic. At the same time, it really wasn't terribly relevant to my talk on the 5 points of leadership and why those matter. But I think they could tell as I was speaking that that's a part of who I am and my priorities. But it's not necessarily a part of everybody. But for me, that matters a lot. And I think it filters into who I am and how I lead and how I relate to people and build those relationships.
And it has been with Coach Dungy as well, a big part, right? I mean, you were talking about really like about the circus and how
right.
Earlier in the episode you were like talking about how you're going through the circus, and I mean, it just seems like he always has this peace about him and this calmness, and I think in a lot of ways, at least for me, like it goes to that faith and
right.
just knowing that, okay, if this is a trial, this is a storm, like I'm here for a reason.
Absolutely. No, it's critical for Tony, who he is, how he leads, how he relates to people. But then with respect to they understand where he's coming from. So he at one point told the story of David and Goliath in the locker room, and he actually read it, passages to it. And some of the guys are like, whoa, that's in a book? I thought that was just a story. And so I was like, yeah, it's actually in a book. But at the end of the day, he didn't mandate, right? He didn't mandate that they read the Bible along with him, and he didn't mandate that they be believers. But they just understood this is where Tony's coming from. This is where part of the lessons and the values that he's going to talk about, this is where they're anchored. So he just this is who I am. And with Tony, it's incredibly appealing. And so I think people are drawn to that. But if they weren't, that was fine too. It's just understanding that's who I am and that's how I'm going to lead, and that's how he did it, without mandating or forcing anything. And I think some people thought, well, Tony, he's only got a bunch of Christians, and they have to think the way he thinks. And I can promise you, some of those guys did not think exactly the way Tony thinks.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think we've talked a lot today about the relationship piece, and it would be, as we've been talking about, that inauthentic to not share who you are in that relationship, and it would be inauthentic to not want to hear from others who they are in that relationship. And if that is a piece that is unshareable, then I think it's never truly a good relationship, and I think that's a difficult piece. So for me, it's always been one of those opportunities to share who I am, to engage with that, and to hear who other people are. And I think Florida, University of Florida, is a place where you have to be able to know the context, but that doesn't mean I'm absent from who I am in that context. And it's not that people don't expect that of me, to share that, to engage with that, because once again, I think it would be inauthentic to who I am and my values and my engagement in that. So it's great. I think I love that story about a book. It's in a book. I think there are some opportunities to share that with those more when you feel comfortable and really define it. But it has helped define my leadership. So not necessarily my teaching of leadership, although it has, but really in who I am as a leader and how I practice leadership. Because that's the other thing, is those who teach, they often say don't practice. So that's really nice about that. I don't have to ever be a leader. I can just teach about leadership. But I try to do both, and I think that has helped guide me, and it's also helped me bring me back, whether when the big grant comes in or the research paper gets accepted, it's helped me remain understanding of who I am and humble, as we've been talking about, compared to the bigger world that I'm in, and the people that I'm working with, and really the amazing people around this table at that university in this world that are doing just really good things. And that's, for me, a cause of something much bigger.
Yeah, it goes into our core value 11 here, for me anyway. Like our core value 11 here is to serve a higher purpose at New Scooters for Less. And I always try to, and it was funny because when we created our core values, we did it as a team, and we created the 10 core values, and then I added that 11th one. Later on, we added a 12th one, which was, if you're late to work, you better bring breakfast. But I added
that other one.
I added the 11th.
But the thing I really love about that is it's not forcing anything on anyone other than you're not the only thing that matters here.
Right.
I don't.
Again, creating perspective.
That's right.
Creating perspective.
That's right.
That
Perspective.
it's much bigger
everywhere.
than. It's much bigger than selling and servicing scooters.
And isn't that the truth? It's about perspective. I mean, this mimosa is a perfect example of perspective. I asked you to bring it. You brought it. I did it as a joke to let you know I was fun. That's a perspective thing. You brought it to show me that you're going to deliver no matter what. And the truth is, like, if I asked you to bring whiskey straight up, you probably look at me and be like, I'm not sure that's right. But now I get to drink at 7:00 in the morning. And
Let's do a Friday night podcast.
It's all, that's right. It's all perception. And I think that's what it does. It sets the perception for, it's got to be something more here than just selling a scooter or just you having a job. And I think that's ultimately how you become scalable, is when you believe in more than just that and allow people to believe more than that. And I've seen that in the stuff that you do.
Guys, thank you so much again for being here. Ty, do you have any last minute things?
This is awesome.
it was fun.
No, just let us know where we can find you both online or on social media.
Definitely. Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
No, I mean, but you guys have.
Let us know. Yeah.
Perfect.
Where can we find you guys? I mean, you have.
So I'm on
website.
Twitter at Nathan Whitaker. I've got a website. My wife calls it my shrine to me, nathanwhitaker.com.
It's very funny, by the way.
Yeah, it's very funny.
The next one, we should have the two wives come in here and just talk about how all of this was made up.
That up.
Yeah, really set that straight.
Yeah,
Oh, would they do it?
I'd have to tell them not to.
Because I would absolutely rock that podcast.
right.
That would be fun.
Yeah. And you?
So mine is Sowcik, SOWCIK at UFL.edu, and that's probably the best way to get in touch with me. Have Facebook and those sort of things, but that's the best way for me to reach out to you and contact you and that sort of stuff too.
Cool. You guys, thank you again so much. This is that's my alarm to take my Prilosec for for my stomach issues that's been going on. Gainesville world, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening, guys. Thanks again for being here.
This is
What
awesome.
an amazing discussion on leadership. Guys, I love doing this in the morning because it's just an incredible way to start my day, and I just feel so fulfilled when I get to have a conversation like this one. So thanks again. And this is the WHOA GNV Podcast, the podcast bringing you businesses and individuals that make you go, whoa. We will see you later. Bye.